This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Today, protests as an Armenia-Azerbaijan peace deal nears completion. The number of people displaced globally hits a new record, and the US prepares to sign a security pact with Ukraine. From TLDR News, this is your daily briefing for Thursday the 13th of June, 2024. Our main story today is that Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has announced that a peace treaty with Azerbaijan is nearing completion. The peace treaty in question concerns the delimitation of their mutual border and agreeing on a settlement to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, a conflict that's lasted for nearly 3 decades. As part of the peace process, Pashinyan announced last month that he would return 4 border villages occupied by Armenia to Azerbaijan, sparking widespread outrage among Armenians and the opposition. Led by prominent cleric and opposition figurehead Archbishop Bagrat Galstinian, thousands of Armenians have been protesting the peace deal since it was announced in May, and yesterday was no different. But things took a bloody turn. Thousands camped outside the National Assembly building demanding Pashinyan's resignation, and clashes soon broke out between police and demonstrations. Reports and video footage from Yerevan showed police firing stun grenades at protesters massed around Parliament. Protesters then moved on to the government building and later dispersed, but the clashes left 17 officers and 79 civilians injured. On top of this, the opposition hasn't been too happy with Armenia's western pivot. Yesterday, Pashinyan told a government session that Armenia will also leave the Collective Security Treaty Organization, or CSTO, a Russian-led security alliance of 6 former Soviet states, saying there is no alternative but to withdraw, and that Armenia won't go back. Armenia's ties with Russia, its long-term ally and supporter, became strained last September when Russian peacekeeping forces failed to stop Azerbaijan taking the Karabakh region. Following Pashinyan's announcement of a peace deal with Azerbaijan last month, Russian border guards began to withdraw from their posts along the disputed frontier, and yesterday completed their full withdrawal. Pashinyan has also fallen out with CSTO member and ex-Soviet ally Belarus. Whilst Pashinyan has accused Russia of failing to live up to its CSTO commitments, he threw a more serious accusation towards Belarus's president, Alexander Lukashenko, accusing him of supporting Azerbaijan during the 2020 war. Pashinyan announced today that no Armenian official would visit Belarus, whilst Lukashenko is in power. Pashinyan, however, isn't out of the woods yet. Whilst claiming that the peace deal is nearing, there is still one big obstacle for Pashinyan. Azerbaijan has called on Armenia to adjust its constitution to remove an indirect reference to Karabakh independence before inking a peace deal. However, Pashinyan stated he will not accept Azerbaijan's demands to change the Armenian constitution. There's more on the way, but remember to subscribe and ring the bell for more daily briefing tomorrow. Plus, if you want to support the channel like Holly Talmage, then consider joining the new TLDR membership program for just $1.99. The United Nations Refugee Agency said on Thursday that a record-breaking 117.3 million people were living forcibly displaced by war, violence and persecution at the end of 2023, the 12th year in a row that the number has increased. In fact, the agency estimated that by the end of April 2024, the number is likely to have exceeded 120 million. The UN's High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, called it a terrible indictment on the state of the world, adding that behind these numbers lie as many human tragedies, which only solidarity and concerted action can alleviate and solve. A number of new conflicts contributed to the rise. For example, in Sudan, a civil war broke out in April 2023, which has displaced more than 6 million people inside the country and forced a further 1.2 million to flee the country entirely. In the Gaza Strip, up to 1.7 million people are estimated to have been displaced between October and December 2023. Meanwhile, in Myanmar, which has been racked by a civil war that started in 2021, but which has more recently escalated, more than 1.3 million people were displaced within the country in 2023. The new report also revealed that the largest proportion of refugees globally were from Afghanistan and Syria, followed by Venezuela and Ukraine, and that 69% of refugees are hosted in countries neighbouring their country of origin, meaning that 3/4 of the world's refugees are hosted in low and middle income countries. US President Joe Biden is being sued by a coalition of advocacy groups over his decision to halt asylum claims at the US-Mexico border. The lawsuit was filed by the American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU, and others on behalf of Las Americas Immigrant Advocacy Center and the Texas-based Refugee and Immigrant Center for Education and Legal Services, or RAICES. It's the first legal test of Biden's new immigration crackdown. For context, last week, Biden introduced an asylum ban on migrants crossing the Mexico-US border illegally, which will allow them to be deported. It comes into effect when the average number of daily border arrests surpasses 2,500 over a week, and will only be dropped once arrests fall below a daily average of 1,500 for 3 weeks. According to the US Department of Homeland Security, there were an average of 4,300 daily arrests in April, figures far higher than the threshold for Biden's measure. However, the asylum ban has been criticised by immigration advocacy groups, who say it's no different to the controversial ban former President Donald Trump imposed. ACLU attorney Lee Gallant said, "By enacting an asylum ban that is legally indistinguishable from the Trump ban we successfully blocked, we were left with no choice but to file this lawsuit." Today, the United States and Ukraine are expected to sign a bilateral 10-year security pact on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Italy. The agreement, which follows months of negotiations, will see the US commit for 10 years to continue training Ukraine's armed forces, greater cooperation in the production of weapons and military equipment, and continued military provision. However, according to reports, it's expected to be an executive agreement rather than a more formal treaty, meaning the pact risks being undone by future presidents. Donald Trump, perhaps. Also at the summit, the G7 leaders are expected to solidify a plan to use frozen Russian assets to raise billions of dollars for Ukraine. Because international law prevents those assets from being confiscated and given directly to Ukraine, the US proposal would see Ukraine granted the money in a loan, secured by the interest on the hundreds of billions of dollars of Russian assets seized by the G7 members and the EU. Interestingly, the G7 leaders in attendance are a real who's who of embattled politicians. Rishi Sunak, Emmanuel Macron, and Joe Biden are in the midst of difficult election campaigns back home, while Olaf Scholz, Justin Trudeau, and Fumio Kishida also face pretty dire approval ratings. In fact, the host Giorgia Meloni, whose party secured a strong result at the recent European elections, boasted that she had the strongest government of all at the summit. In our final story for today, we feature a newly discovered species of plastic-eating marine fungus. Scientists from the Royal Netherlands Institute for Sea Research have found that the marine fungus Parangiodontium album can decompose the plastic polyethylene after it has been exposed to UV radiation from sunlight, an important discovery in the urgent search for plastic-degrading organisms. Published in the journal Science of the Total Environment, the findings mean that the P. album fungus joins a very short list of known plastic-eating marine fungi. However, the paper's lead author, Annika Vaxmer, said it's likely that the other plastic-degrading fungi also reside in deeper parts of the ocean. She said marine fungi can break down complex materials made of carbon. There are numerous amounts of marine fungi, so it's likely that in addition to the 4 species identified so far, other species also contribute to plastic degradation. Now, understanding exactly what has or is going to happen here can be a little tricky, requiring you to evaluate lots of information from different, often partial sources. It would be sensible then to begin improving your critical thinking skills so that you can keep sharp and better understand what's going on. And well, our sponsor Brilliant.org can help you do just that. Brilliant is the online learning platform that's designed specifically to teach you everything from maths, data analysis, programming, and AI from the ground up. You don't need a fancy degree or to have dedicated hundreds of hours to studying any of these. All you need is a device with an internet connection and a few spare minutes a day. And with your spare few minutes, you'll learn by actually doing, with Brilliant providing hands-on lessons that let you play around with concepts, a method that has been shown to be 6 times more effective than just watching lectures. What makes this even better is that this content is created by an award-winning team of teachers, researchers, and professionals from MIT, Caltech, Duke, Microsoft, and more. You can try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days. Just click on the link in the description. That way you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription.